January 17th, 1944. The streets of Strasbourg lie under a brittle frost. A pale winter sun struggles to pierce the gray clouds, casting long shadows over deserted cobblestones. The distant rumble of artillery echoes faintly across the Rhine, a constant reminder that the war is never far. Footsteps crunch on the icy pavement. A lone figure hurries along the narrow alleys. A young woman, bundled in a dark wool coat, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. She clutches a small satchel, its contents a secret as dangerous as any weapon. Every shadow feels alive. Every passing soldier could be the end of her mission. She knows the risk. The Gestapo is everywhere, eyes always watching, ears always listening. Yet, there is no hesitation. Each careful step carries her deeper into the heart of occupied territory, where whispers of hidden experiments and forbidden research have reached the resistance. Tonight, her mission is simple: deliver a message. But tonight, she will uncover something far more dangerous, something that even the Allied command cannot yet imagine. The frost bites, the city sleeps, and somewhere beyond these streets, a secret waits to be revealed. By early 1944, Europe was a continent at war, fractured and reshaped by the ambitions of Nazi Germany. The Eastern Front consumed millions of soldiers and civilians alike, while the Allies prepared for the decisive invasion of Western Europe. Cities lay in ruin, their architecture scarred by bombardments, their streets haunted by the footsteps of occupying forces. Within this chaos, the Nazi regime pursued another war, one hidden, secret, and terrifying in its potential. The German military, under Adolf Hitler's direct orders, had turned to research facilities scattered across occupied territories and within Germany itself. These laboratories were far from the battlefields. In concealed complexes, scientists and engineers worked tirelessly on advanced weaponry, rocketry, chemical compounds, and experimental military technologies. Piemont, for instance, had become the cradle of the V-2 rocket, a weapon that would soon terrorize London. Elsewhere, smaller labs conducted biological and chemical experiments whose results were meant to change the course of war, or, in some cases, serve darker ideological purposes. Access was forbidden, guarded by SS officers, and documented only in top-secret reports. The existence of these facilities was known to few, and even fewer had witnessed them firsthand. At the same time, resistance networks in occupied France, Belgium, and the Netherlands were expanding. Couriers, often young men and women, served as lifelines between hidden operatives, intelligence cells, and the Allies. Their work was perilous. They carried codes, blueprints, and critical messages through cities crawling with informants and patrols. The Gestapo was relentless, interrogating anyone suspected of subversion with ruthless efficiency. A single misstep could mean imprisonment, torture, or execution. Yet, these couriers were essential. Without them, intelligence could not flow, plans could not form, and the war could not be contested behind enemy lines. In Strasbourg, a city of narrow medieval streets, now occupied by German forces, life continued under the shadow. Public life was regulated. Curfews dictated movement, and the once bustling marketplaces felt hollow under the omnipresent scrutiny of soldiers. Within these streets, rumors traveled faster than official news. Whispers of strange experiments, laboratories hidden in remote estates or underground bunkers. The population, fearful yet curious, exchanged fragments of information that sometimes reached the ears of resistance leaders. Each rumor carried weight, for the Allies desperately needed knowledge of Nazi technological and scientific advances. Into this environment stepped the young courier. She was not trained in combat, nor was she a soldier of rank. Yet her skills, discretion, language fluency, and an instinct for reading human behavior made her invaluable. Her mission appeared simple: Deliver a message to an Allied contact who claimed to possess intelligence about a Nazi facility. But intelligence of this nature rarely came without danger. To reach her destination, she would need to navigate checkpoints, patrols, and informants. Every decision carried immediate consequences, and every shadow could hide death. Behind the veneer of military strategy, behind maps and troop movements, another war was unfolding. A war of knowledge, secrecy, and courage. The Nazis sought advantage through hidden laboratories. The Allies relied on courage and risk to expose them. This war was silent, invisible to the soldiers on the front lines. Its outcome would shape the battlefield in ways conventional combat could not. And so, the stage was set. A city under occupation, a regime desperate for secrecy, and a young woman tasked with carrying information that could pierce the veil of Nazi scientific ambitions. In this fragile tension, every step mattered. Every decision carried the weight of life or death, and every moment brought her closer to a truth that would shock both sides of the conflict. The Courier had been selected for this mission not by chance, but because of her precision, courage, and calm under pressure. She had spent months in preparation, learning the patterns of German patrols, memorizing safe houses, and decoding messages that would guide her through enemy territory. Each detail mattered. A misstep could compromise not only her life, but the lives of those relying on her intelligence. She carried a small leather satchel, its contents nondescript to any casual observer. Yet within it lay information that could illuminate the shadows of Nazi secrecy. Her route was carefully plotted. She would weave through Strasbourg's narrow alleys to avoid main roads, move past fortified checkpoints, and slip unnoticed into sectors under heavy surveillance. The city's population lived under the constant gaze of soldiers and informants, making anonymity a rare commodity. Each encounter was a potential threat. A soldier's glance, a civilian's curious stare, or the faintest sound of pursuit could reveal her presence. She understood the delicate balance between speed and caution, knowing that hesitation could be fatal and recklessness could be catastrophic. Rumors had reached the resistance of a laboratory unlike any other. It was said to be hidden in a repurposed industrial estate on the outskirts of the city, guarded by both soldiers and the scientific elite. Reports hinted at unusual activity, trucks arriving under cover of night, heavy shipments being moved through secure gates, and lights burning long into the early hours. Such facilities were designed to remain invisible, to exist in the shadows while the war raged openly elsewhere. Few had seen them, and fewer still had returned to tell of what they had witnessed. The Courier's mission was ostensibly simple: deliver a coded message to an Allied contact who claimed knowledge of these secret operations. But the message was a key, a thread leading into a labyrinth of danger and discovery. As she moved closer to the outer perimeter of the suspected laboratory, small signs of abnormal activity became apparent. Unusual security protocols, the distant hum of machinery behind reinforced walls, and the unmistakable scent of chemicals carried on the cold winter air. Resistance leaders had briefed her on stakes. Allied intelligence relied on the timely flow of information from within occupied territories. Every report about Nazi experiments or technological advancements could shift strategic planning. They had emphasized discretion, not heroics. Yet she could not ignore the growing pattern she sensed. This was not a typical research facility. Something about it was different. The experiments conducted here, if real, could alter the course of the war. Despite the tension, she remained methodical. Each step was measured, each observation cataloged mentally for later reporting. She noted the behavior of guards, the routines of vehicles, and the placement of sentries. The city's winter nights were long and harsh, and she used darkness as her ally, moving in shadows that concealed her from patrolling eyes. Every moment brought her closer to uncovering a secret few dared to speak of. And then came the first glimpse of it, a high perimeter wall, topped with barbed wire, faint lights flickering behind reinforced windows. The signs she had pieced together over months of preparation were real. This was the laboratory, hidden, fortified, alive with activity, and filled with secrets that would challenge everything the Allies believed about the Nazi war machine. For the Courier, the mission had transformed. She was no longer simply delivering a message. She was about to step into the very heart of the enemy's hidden power. The tension coiled around her like the winter fog, and every decision she made in the next hours would define not just the success of her mission, but the flow of knowledge in a war fought as much in shadows as on the battlefield. Fear was never absent. For the young Courier, every step through Strasbourg's icy streets carried the weight of life or death. She was not a soldier, yet in these moments she exhibited the courage of one, tempered with the acute awareness of human fragility. Her nerves thrummed with a constant tension, her senses heightened to every subtle cue. The distant bark of a guard dog, the flicker of movement in a shadowed alley, the muffled steps of a soldier rounding a corner. These were not mere obstacles. They were potential executioners. Inside the laboratory's perimeter, human fear manifested differently. Scientists worked under relentless pressure, their minds consumed by formulas, blueprints, and experiments that could change the course of the war. Yet even their brilliance was constrained by terror. Guards patrolled corridors with rigid precision, eyes unyielding, instructions unambiguous. One misstep, a wrong glance, a tardy report, could bring sudden, lethal discipline. Behind closed doors, the men and women of the lab lived in constant oscillation between purpose and dread, their work imbued with the knowledge that failure meant more than disappointment. It meant death. The human element extended to the resistance operatives who orchestrated the mission. They trusted the Courier not because of her youth, but because she embodied the rare combination of intellect, bravery, and discretion. Each Courier carried more than messages. They carried hope, knowledge, and a fragile lifeline connecting occupied Europe to Allied command. Their courage was quiet, invisible, yet indispensable. Every successful mission relied on strategy as much as courage. The Courier's route had been meticulously planned, balancing the risks of patrols, checkpoints, and informants against the urgency of her task. Tactical thinking extended to movement through streets, timing of deliveries, and methods of concealment. Occupied Strasbourg presented a landscape of invisible threats. Soldiers in uniform, civilians coerced into reporting, and a city that, though familiar, had become a maze of danger under occupation. Surveillance techniques dictated her path. Guards followed predictable patterns, but vigilance was imperfect. Tactical insight allowed her to exploit minor lapses. She observed the sequence of vehicle patrols, noted the intervals of sentry rotations, and timed her movements to coincide with environmental advantages. The dim light of pre-dawn fog, the distractions of city noises, or the shadowed recesses of alleys. Each decision was immediate and consequential. The laboratory itself was fortified with tactical ingenuity. Barbed wire, reinforced gates, and guarded entrances created multiple layers of security. Inside, experiments required secrecy not just for scientific reasons, but as a tactical measure to protect the Nazi war effort. Any breach, whether from espionage or sabotage, threatened the operational advantage the regime sought. The Courier, navigating this environment, had to match strategy with instinct. Every pause, every glance, every choice of route was measured against the possibility of detection. Even seemingly mundane objects became tactical tools. A satchel hidden beneath a coat, a forged document carefully placed in a pocket, a subtle signal to indicate safe passage. In a war dominated by machinery and brute force, these small, precise acts of human calculation often determined success or failure. The interplay of human courage and tactical awareness defined the mission's rhythm, creating tension that pulsed with every heartbeat. As the courier approached the laboratory perimeter, the tactical stakes intensified. She was entering a zone where preparation alone could not guarantee survival. Decisions had to be instantaneous, combining observation, calculation, and improvisation. The environment was designed to trap, but her skill in navigating it demonstrated the power of human intellect and adaptability when facing the machinery of war. The laboratory she was approaching was unlike any conventional research facility. Inside, the Nazis pursued experiments that blurred the line between ambition and obsession. Reports intercepted by the resistance hinted at chemical compounds with destructive potential, prototypes of advanced weaponry, and mechanical devices intended to give the Reich a decisive advantage. At Peenemünde, the V-2 rockets demonstrated what such secrecy could yield, precision engineering hidden from the world until unleashed in terror. Similarly, this lab represented a concentrated hub of innovation, a nexus where intellect met ideology and theory was translated into lethal application. Every corridor, every chamber, every piece of equipment was optimized for secrecy and efficiency. Machines hummed with precision, test chambers were reinforced, and chemical storage units glimmered under faint illumination. The facility's layout was tactical in itself. Winding corridors designed to confuse intruders, reinforced doors compartmentalizing sensitive experiments, and redundant security systems to protect knowledge that could not fall into enemy hands. The technology was both tool and weapon, a testament to the intersection of genius and ruthlessness. For the courier, understanding this technological landscape was critical. Each observation she made, the type of machinery, the scale of experiments, the movement of materials, was intelligence of immense value. Allies who would later analyze her report could use these details to gauge Nazi capabilities, anticipate future weapons, and plan strategic responses. In this sense, the courier was not just a messenger. She was a lens through which the clandestine mechanics of war could be revealed. The laboratory existed because of meticulous planning and authoritative oversight. Nazi leaders recognized the strategic advantage of secrecy, and command structures were designed to enforce it. At the top, military and scientific leadership operated in parallel. Generals and SS officers dictated security, while scientists dictated experimental priorities. Orders flowed downward with precision. Compliance was enforced through fear, discipline, and the threat of execution. From the enemy's perspective, the laboratory represented a microcosm of the Reich itself. Hierarchical, ruthless, and singularly focused on outcome. Guards, supervisors, and scientists alike were instruments of a larger design. Every action was monitored, every movement scrutinized, and every deviation punished. For the courier, understanding the structure was as important as physical observation. Knowing who wielded authority, who could grant access, and who enforced rules offered insight into potential weaknesses. Enemy psychology became a map as critical as the city streets, guiding every calculated step toward the hidden truth. Even within this rigid framework, human flaws persisted. Overconfidence, routine, and predictability offered openings for those brave enough to exploit them. The courier's mission relied on perceiving these gaps, understanding not just the physical environment, but the behavior of the people who inhabited it. In war, as in science, mastery of the system required both observation and intuition. The laboratory's existence was more than a strategic concern, it was a moral crisis. Behind sealed doors, human lives could be subjected to experiments that challenged the limits of ethical comprehension. Resistance members understood that their mission was not merely to gather intelligence, but to intervene in a system that commodified life for ideology and power. The courier, stepping closer to the heart of this darkness, faced a moral reckoning before even reaching the facility. The knowledge she would carry could save lives, prevent atrocities, and shaped the future of the war, yet it also bore the weight of human suffering witnessed within the walls. Every decision carried moral consequence. Each step into enemy territory risked not only her life, but the lives of innocents, civilians, captured scientists, or coerced workers within a laboratory. Infiltration was not simply a tactical maneuver. It was an ethical act. Observing and reporting could disrupt horrific projects, yet exposure could provoke violent retaliation. The tension between action and consequence infused every moment with gravity. Courage was inseparable from conscience, and bravery required understanding not only the risk to oneself, but the moral implications of success or failure. The moment arrived without ceremony. Just beyond the perimeter wall, the courier paused, pressing herself into the shadow of a leafless tree. The laboratory rose ahead of her in muted gray tones, industrial, angular, deliberately anonymous. No insignia marked its purpose. No signage betrayed its function. That absence was itself confirmation. In the Third Reich, secrecy was not hidden behind symbols, but behind silence. Guards moved in measured patterns along the outer fence. Their rifles were carried low, confidence replacing urgency. This was not a frontline post. It was a place where control was assumed. That assumption created its own vulnerability. The courier waited. She counted rotations. She noted the timing of cigarette breaks, the way one sentry lingered longer than the others near the service entrance. The fog, thickening with the night, softened the hard edges of the compound. When the moment came, she crossed the narrow stretch of open ground in 3 quick movements, her boots barely disturbing the frost-coated soil. Inside the outer boundary, the air changed. A low mechanical hum pulsed beneath the silence, steady, powerful, unmistakably industrial. It was not the sound of generators supporting a simple warehouse. It was the heartbeat of a working facility. Pipes ran along the outer walls, insulated, warm to the touch. Ventilation shafts exhaled faint clouds of steam that rose briefly before vanishing into the cold. She had not yet entered the building, and already the evidence was overwhelming. Through a narrow window, she caught her first glimpse inside. Rows of metal tables stood under harsh white lights. Instruments were arranged with clinical precision, glassware, pressure gauges, steel canisters marked with stenciled codes rather than names. Men in white coats moved between stations, their motions efficient, emotionless. Uniformed guards stood at intervals, watching not the work but the workers. This was not experimentation in its early stages. This was production. The courier forced herself to breathe slowly, committing every detail to memory. The resistance had suspected a laboratory. What she was seeing suggested something far more advanced, an operation already integrated into the machinery of war. She moved along the building's edge, careful to remain below the windows. A service door stood slightly ajar, its lock disabled from frequent use. Nearby, a clipboard hung on a nail, papers fluttering gently in the draft. She did not touch it. Even disturbance could be detected here. Inside, voices echoed faintly through the walls. German, technical, precise. She recognized fragments, terms associated with compounds, delivery mechanisms, controlled reactions. This was not theoretical research. These are conversations about results, about yields, about scalability. Whatever was being developed here was nearing deployment. A distant footstep froze her in place. A guard emerged from around the corner, adjusting his gloves against the cold. He stopped only meters away, striking a match. The brief flare of light illuminated his face. Young, tired, unaware of how close he stood to exposure. The courier flattened herself against the wall, heart pounding, the satchel pressed tight against her side. Seconds stretched into an eternity. The match burned out. The guard turned and walked on. Only then did she move again. She circled toward the rear of the facility, where loading bays opened into a narrow service road. Tire tracks marked frequent traffic. Crates stood stacked under canvas covers, their edges reinforced with steel bands. One had been left partially open. Inside, She glimpsed sealed containers, identical in size and shape, each marked only with a serial number. No warning labels. No hazard markings. That omission was deliberate. The Nazis understood that secrecy extended even to their own logistical chains. Fewer people knowing the nature of the cargo meant fewer opportunities for leaks. But to Allied intelligence, these details were invaluable. Uniform containers meant standardized deployment. Frequent transport meant operational readiness. This was not a dormant project. This was a weapon in waiting. The Courier withdrew, retracing her steps with painstaking care. She resisted the instinct to flee. Panic would erase memory. She needed clarity, precision, survival with purpose. When she reached the outer boundary again, she paused one last time, looking back at the building. Behind its reinforced walls, men continued their work, unaware that their secrecy had been breached. Not by force, not by sabotage, but by observation. The most dangerous kind. She slipped back into the fog, carrying no physical evidence, yet bearing something far more powerful: knowledge. And knowledge, once released, could not be contained. As she moved away from the compound, footsteps fading into the winter night, the true danger began to take shape. Not in what she had seen, but in what would happen if she failed to deliver it. Because now, the secret was real, and the Reich would kill to keep it that way. The Courier did not run. Running drew attention. Running invited questions. Instead, she walked, measured, deliberate, her pace no different from any civilian moving through a sleeping city under occupation. The fog swallowed her silhouette as she left the laboratory behind, but she did not allow herself relief. Discovery was rarely immediate. It came later, when patterns were reviewed, when guards noticed a gate left open, when someone realized that silence had been broken. Every step away from the facility carried the risk of pursuit. She adjusted her route, abandoning the path she had planned in advance. Predictability was now her enemy. She turned into narrower streets, doubled back once, then crossed a small canal over a footbridge slick with frost. Somewhere behind her, an engine started. She did not look back. The city was awake in fragments. A bakery prepared for dawn. A tram rattled in the distance. German patrols shifted positions as the night gave way to morning. The Courier merged into this rhythm, another anonymous figure moving through controlled normality. But the pressure inside her chest did not ease. The intelligence she carried existed only in her memory. There were no documents, no photographs, no samples. If she were captured now, the discovery would vanish with her. That knowledge sharpened every decision. She avoided safe houses too close to the laboratory, knowing they might already be compromised. Instead, she headed for a secondary contact point, an apartment used rarely, remembered only by those trained to expect nothing. She reached it just before dawn. Inside, the air was stale and cold. She locked the door behind her and stood still, listening. No footsteps, no shouts, no sudden violence. Only then did she allow herself to sit. What followed was not rest. She reconstructed the laboratory in her mind, methodically. Layout, guard patterns, equipment, timelines, terminology overheard, vehicle movements, everything. Intelligence officers had trained her for this. How to observe without emotion, how to remember without distortion. She spoke quietly to herself, repeating details until they settled into permanence. By mid-morning, the message was ready. Transmission was the most dangerous phase of all. The Courier left the apartment carrying nothing unusual, dressed now as a factory worker heading toward the outskirts. Her contact operated from a repair shop that serviced agricultural equipment, an ideal cover in a region still reliant on farming despite the war. The shop smelled of oil and metal, its clutter masking the presence of a hidden radio transmitter concealed beneath a workbench. The contact listened without interruption. When she finished, he said nothing at first. He simply nodded once, the kind of nod reserved for information that could not be dismissed. Within hours, fragments of her report began moving outward, encoded, relayed, fragmented again. From Strasbourg to Lyon, from Lyon to London. from London to Allied intelligence desks, where analysts cross-referenced her observations with aerial reconnaissance, intercepted communications, and other resistance reports. Patterns emerged. The standardized containers matched known logistical routes. The ventilation design suggested chemical containment. The production-scale activity indicated a facility beyond experimental research. Combined with recent Allied concerns about unconventional weapons, the implications were immediate and grave. Within days, the laboratory was elevated from rumor to confirmed target. But for the Courier, the climax did not end with delivery. Gestapo activity increased across the city. Checkpoints multiplied. Arrests followed. Someone had noticed the breach. Perhaps a guard unsettled by a memory he could not place. Perhaps a supervisor sensing vulnerability. The Reich did not know what had been taken, only that something had. The Courier was ordered to disappear. She moved again, this time without destination, shifting between safe houses, altering her appearance, learning new routines. The weight of what she had done settled heavily now. Success did not bring relief. It brought consequence. Some weeks later, Allied aircraft would pass overhead. Bombing raids would strike industrial targets in the region. Their true objectives, known only to planners far from the smoke and fire. Whether the laboratory was destroyed entirely, partially evacuated, or dismantled in haste would remain classified for years. But its secrecy had been broken. For the Courier, survival was its own quiet victory. She would never see official recognition. Her name would not appear in reports. Her role would be reduced to lines in declassified files long after the war ended. Yet the turning point had occurred. Not in the explosion of bombs, not in the speeches of leaders, but in the careful observation of one individual who walked into the heart of enemy secrecy and walked out again with the truth. And once the truth escaped, the war itself subtly shifted, away from hidden certainty toward exposed vulnerability. That shift would echo far beyond Strasbourg. It would shape what came next. The response unfolded quietly at first. There were no public announcements, no immediate signs that anything had changed. To civilians in Strasbourg, the occupation continued as it always had. Curfews enforced, patrols visible, fear unspoken but ever present. Yet beneath that surface, the discovery of a laboratory began to alter decisions made far from the city streets. Allied intelligence analysts compared the Courier's report against existing data. Aerial photographs taken months earlier were re-examined with new purpose. What had once appeared as an unremarkable industrial complex now revealed subtle indicators. Reinforced roofing, concealed exhaust systems, unusual transport frequency. Signals intelligence intercepted fragments of German communications that, in hindsight, aligned with her observations. The pieces formed a coherent picture. The laboratory was real. Its purpose was advanced, and its timeline was urgent. This understanding forced immediate strategic recalibration. Targets once considered secondary were reassessed. Planners debated options: airstrikes, sabotage through resistance networks, or containment through disruption of supply lines. Each carried risks. Destroying the facility outright could provoke German retaliation or scatter its personnel to other hidden sites. Leaving it untouched risked deployment of whatever was being produced within. Ultimately, action was taken with deliberation rather than haste. In the weeks that followed, German logistics in the region experienced unexplained disruptions. Transport convoys were delayed. Rail lines servicing industrial estates suffered repeated failures. These incidents were not dramatic enough to attract attention, yet they created pressure. Production schedules slipped. Redundancies were exposed. The laboratory, once operating with confident efficiency, began to feel the weight of uncertainty. Inside the facility, security tightened. Additional guards were assigned. Scientists were subjected to increased scrutiny. Movements were logged with greater precision. The very secrecy that had protected the operation now worked against it, breeding suspicion and paranoia. Innovation slowed as fear replaced focus. Some personnel were reassigned. Others disappeared entirely, removed under the Reich's internal discipline system when trust faltered. The Courier's role, though unseen, echoed through every one of these changes. Within the resistance, the cost was heavy. Several cells were compromised as the Gestapo intensified its search for the source of the leak. Arrests followed. Interrogations were conducted with ruthless efficiency. Not everyone survived. The Courier learned of these losses indirectly, through silences where messages once arrived, through names no longer spoken. Victory, even of this kind, was never clean. For her, survival required constant movement. She was relocated beyond Strasbourg, passed between networks that barely knew her name. Her life became one of deliberate invisibility. There would be no return to normalcy until the war itself ended. And even then, the shadows would linger. The laboratory's fate remained uncertain in the short term. Reports suggested partial evacuation, hurried dismantling, and redistribution of research assets deeper into German territory. That alone was a success. Disruption meant delay. Delay meant time. And time, in 1944, was the Allies' greatest advantage. As the front lines shifted and Allied forces prepared for the invasion of Western Europe, the existence of one less fully operational secret facility reduced the Reich's capacity to respond with new, untested weapons. The war moved forward, altered in ways few could see. And behind that movement stood a chain of consequences set in motion not by firepower, but by observation, memory, and the courage to carry truth out of darkness. What followed would stretch far beyond immediate tactical outcomes, shaping the long-term legacy of secrecy, science, and accountability in the final phase of the war. As the months passed and the war pressed inexorably toward its conclusion, the laboratory faded from immediate attention, absorbed into the vast machinery of collapsing Nazi infrastructure. Yet its influence did not disappear. It reemerged in fragments, documents recovered after liberation, interrogations of captured officials, and technical assessments conducted by Allied specialists moving through newly secured territory. What they found confirmed the Courier's observations. The facility had been part of a broader network of concealed research sites, designed to decentralize development and protect sensitive programs from Allied bombing. Its work, though never fully completed, reflected the Reich's increasing reliance on unconventional solutions as conventional military superiority eroded. The emphasis on rapid deployment, standardized containment, and secrecy suggested weapons intended for use despite dwindling resources and mounting pressure. In the post-war years, Allied investigators pieced together the scope of such operations. Some scientists were captured and questioned. Others vanished into obscurity, their identities lost amid the chaos of defeat. A few would later reappear under different names in new research institutions, their past selectively forgotten as Cold War priorities reshaped moral boundaries. The laboratory, once a node of hidden ambition, became a footnote in a much larger reckoning with the ethics of wartime science. For the resistance, the cost remained deeply personal. Many networks never fully recovered from the intensified crackdowns of 1944. The sacrifices made during those final months were borne quietly, remembered in local memorials rather than international histories. The Courier survived the war, but survival carried its own burden. She returned to a world that moved forward without ceremony, where acts of quiet bravery rarely found public acknowledgement. Her contribution existed in files marked classified, then restricted, then forgotten. Yet its impact endured. The disruption of the laboratory delayed research programs already struggling against material shortages and Allied pressure. That delay mattered. In a war measured in weeks and days, Postponement could mean the difference between deployment and abandonment. It reduced uncertainty for Allied planners and denied the Reich another tool with which to prolong the conflict. More broadly, the episode reinforced a lesson that would shape modern intelligence doctrine. That human observation remained indispensable, even in an age of machines and mass surveillance. Aerial photography could reveal structures. Signals intelligence could intercept fragments. But it was the human presence, eyes on the ground, judgment formed in real time, that transformed fragments into understanding. The Courier had not sabotaged machinery or destroyed equipment. She had done something more enduring. She had exposed intent. After the war, investigations into Nazi scientific programs would shock the world. Trials would reveal the extent to which ideology had corrupted research, turning laboratories into instruments of cruelty. The facility she uncovered stood as one example among many, yet it underscored a universal truth. Secrecy enables atrocity when left unchallenged. As Europe rebuilt, new safeguards emerged. Ethical frameworks for scientific research were formalized. Intelligence agencies refined methods of human intelligence collection. The shadows did not vanish, but they were better understood. And somewhere beyond the archives, beyond the official histories, the story, a single Courier remained. A reminder that the course of history can be altered without armies, without weapons, without recognition. Only by the willingness to step into darkness and return with the truth. That truth would echo long after the laboratory itself had ceased to exist. War is often remembered through its most visible moments. Armies advancing, cities burning, leaders speaking from podiums framed by flags. Yet history is equally shaped by events that leave no immediate mark on maps or monuments. In occupied Europe, far from the front lines, the outcome of the conflict was influenced by individuals whose actions unfolded in silence. The Courier was one of them. She did not carry a weapon. She did not command troops. She moved through streets already claimed by fear, guided only by discipline, memory, and an understanding of what knowledge could prevent. What she uncovered was not just a laboratory, but a mindset, a belief that secrecy could shield cruelty, that innovation divorced from ethics could be justified by ideology. By exposing that secrecy, she disrupted more than a single facility. She challenged the assumption that hidden power remains hidden forever. The story of the laboratory reminds us that technological ambition, when unchecked, becomes dangerous not because of what it can build, but because of what it allows people to ignore. Behind reinforced walls and guarded corridors, ordinary routines masked extraordinary harm. It took human presence, eyes willing to look, minds willing to remember, to pierce that illusion. For the resistance, for the couriers, for countless unnamed individuals, courage was not expressed through grand gestures. It existed in restraint, in patience, in the refusal to look away. Their victories were measured not in territory gained, but in damage prevented and lives spared. After the war, the world would struggle to define new boundaries for science and warfare. Ethical codes were written in response to lessons learned too late for many. Intelligence services refined their methods, acknowledging that even in an age of machines, the human element remained irreplaceable. The laboratory fell into obscurity. Its walls were dismantled, its records scattered. But the act that exposed it endured, because history is not only shaped by those who build weapons, but by those who ensure they are never used. And sometimes, the most decisive turning point begins with a message meant only to be delivered, until someone chooses to see what lies beyond it.